Hello, everyone. We are in the Microbial Ecology lecture now, and just wanted to start it off by saying how cool is this plate that I found a picture of. This is so many different species of bacteria and fungi, and probably some eukaryotes as well, living together in the same plate, affecting each other's growth. Um, you can see all the cool different ways that they can grow, and that's basically what we're going to talk about today. It's kind of the interactions between different microbial species out in the environment. Now, this is going to be a little bit on the shorter side, but it's a lot of fun and very interesting stuff to talk about. So there's your objectives and all the key terms. Hopefully a lot of those key terms are ones you've heard before, but all right, so microbes are literally everywhere. I have a cousin who is doing his PhD in microbiology at through Virginia Tech, and he actually goes to Antarctica and studies the lakes underneath the ice, and he's finding tons of microbes there. So they are literally everywhere. They're inside of us, they're on us, they're in the soil, they're in the air, they are everywhere. Um, and when we talk about the fact that they're everywhere, this means they play a crucial role no matter where they're located. They evolve to be important to that particular habitat or niche, and they're going to have a significant interplay and influence on the organisms around them. Like the stink bug here has a symbiotic bacteria that allows the invasive stink bug to colonize plants and be able to tolerate whatever plants it wants to eat. So let's go back to honestly high school or middle school, but definitely early biology classes, and just do a quick reminder of the ecological terminology. So you are an organism, an individual. Groups of individuals of the same species living in a common location is a population. So us in the classroom, we are a population of humans. A community is the sum of all populations of different species that live together in a common location. So communities, the actual range that we're talking about is highly dependent, and we can place our own geographical range on the community we want to discuss. So we can say that you as an individual are the community. And so we're talking about all of the human cells on you, all of the bacterial cells on you, the archaeal cells, the fungal cells, the viruses. So we can talk about all of those communities of species living on you. Or we can pull that out to the classroom and talk about all the bugs that are living in the classroom. We can pull that out to the school and discuss all the trees and the plants that we interact with and those really crazy squirrels that come and fight you all the time. So the community is based on the geographical limit that we place on it, but it's all of the different species interacting with each other. So it's the what we call biotic or living factors of a given area. And then there's ecosystem. So this is the community that you designate plus its habitat and environment. So this is the biotic, the living, and the abiotic or non-living components of that given area. So now we're including things like temperature, salinity, climate, how much water is available, what chemicals are being released by the other organisms around you that you have to tolerate for competition reasons, like how much limiting nutrients are available, all that kind of stuff. So microbial communities in particular are so important to the environment because they have a crucial role in shaping the environment and actually creating a lot of the habitats that a lot of us multicellular organisms take advantage of. So the microbes that are associated in particular with a host, be that an animal or a plant, Those are called a microbiome. So these are the community of microbes that live on or in an organism. Now, let's take a moment to pause too and consider this one thing. The vast majority of microbes are uncultured and potentially even undiscovered. So if we know the key role that microbes play in just the ones that we've been able to discover and culture, imagine how much more of the environment is shaped by the ones that we can't possibly comprehend because we haven't discovered them yet. So, all organisms depend directly or indirectly on each other. No organism is a complete island. They are going to be affected by everything else around them. So, within a community, each species population fills what we call a niche. This is a role within the environment. We call it a job. So it's a set of conditions, including the habitat, resources, relations that enable an organism to grow and reproduce. That's the textbook definition, but I definitely prefer the role. Um, One of the ways that we first introduced this to students is there is a group of organisms called pollinators. They fulfill that crucial niche, that crucial role of allowing plants to reproduce by pollinating them. So there's many different niches out there in the world. We talked about a couple classes ago where we had methanogens, which produced methane as a byproduct of their metabolism. And that created a niche for methanotrophs that were able to then eat that methane. So in the end, a lot of microbes are involved in what we call niche construction, which is basically shaping the biochemical dimensions, the biochemical aspects of an environment to create a possible new role for another organism to fulfill. And they don't do this on purpose. It's merely often a byproduct. So when we talk about cyanobacteria and the fact that early Earth had very little oxygen, now we start to say, well, they started to produce more and more oxygen, and then suddenly we had an oxygenated planet that created this niche where all these new organisms that could tolerate oxygen could grow and evolve, and now we have all of these new roles that were produced solely because of these oxygen producing bacteria. So let's get into our first main point here, and that is carbon assimilation and dissimilation, basically the food web, which I'm sure you've all heard of a food web or food chain at the very least from elementary school or middle school. So overall, the interactions between microbes and their ecosystems are broken down into two different categories: assimilation processes or dissimilation processes. Assimilation is where organisms acquire an element to build into their cells and they assimilate it into their self. I'm going to sound like a total nerd here, but if any of you guys have ever seen Star Trek The Next Generation or Star Trek Voyager and you've seen the Borg, these are a species of alien that go about and steal organisms from other species and assimilate them into the Borg collective. So they become Borg, even though they used to be human or something else. That's the idea. You're taking these things from the environment and then bringing them into who and what you are and converting it into self. Then there is dissimilation. These are processes where we break down organic nutrients into inorganic minerals that we kind of leave in the environment to shape the environment. Now, all of this ends up coming back to a discussion of biomass. This is the actual physical mass or body of an organism. Most commonly, biomass is created through carbon fixation, but the other part of it is created through assimilation processes. Now, to obtain this energy and to obtain these materials for biomass, all organisms, no matter what kind of organism they are and what type of metabolism they perform, they're going to participate in the food web. And we tend to, at this level, instead of discussing it more as a food web, we like to consider it based on their trophic level or what level of consumption they are. So overall, If you've never seen this before, there are these pyramids, these trophic pyramids, where you'll have primary producers. These are often the bottom of the pyramid. They are the ones that can take inorganic carbon and sunlight and assimilate them and create biomass. These are your plants, your cyanobacteria, your algae, and they will then feed all of these other levels of the pyramid. That's why they're the base. So then we'll have grazers, or organisms that are what we call herbivores on land, that will consume the producers. And then you'll have predators, which can consume the grazers. And then you'll have other types of predators that can not only consume the grazers, but they can also consume the primary producers. And then there are decomposers, which can consume all of these. And when these organisms die, they take their bodies and through dissimilation processes, put them back into the atmosphere in the form of minerals or carbon dioxide. So going into this just a little bit more, the primary producers absorb energy from the outside ecosystem and assimilate minerals into their biomass. That is their role. They put energy into the ecosystem, usually by converting sunlight energy into usable energy for the ecosystem. Most of our primary producers will fix carbon dioxide using light. Photosynthesis is the main way we think of this. However, as we learned already, some primary producers will fix carbon dioxide using various forms of chemical energy rather than light energy. So the primary producer in the microbial world is cyanobacteria, or algae. Um, then when we talk about the consumers, the ones that will consume other organisms, these are the grazers and the predators. Your grazers in the microbial world will consist of things like protists or other invertebrates, things like that. But that's only about 60% of how the primary producers get consumed. The other 40% come from predators called viruses. So viruses are the primary predators of the microbial world. They can kill primary producers or consumers, depending on the species. And 40% of all primary producers end up being killed by viruses. That's just really crazy to consider when you stop and think about it. And then no matter what trophic level you are a part of, you will eventually be given over to decomposers, who will then take your carbon, take your biomass, take the minerals that have been assimilated into your body, and return them to the environment to restart the cycle, so those primary producers can use them again. So there's a lot of environmental factors that affect growth. We have definitely talked about this a lot way early in the course, but let's look at it just from a broader perspective with our new knowledge that we've taken in. The number one factor that's going to affect growth is the availability of electron acceptors. If you do not have a good final or terminal electron acceptor, you will not be able to do metabolism. So you won't be able to get energy to do work to live, and you will most likely die. Oxygen is usually the electron acceptor that is most desired by the planet, or by all organisms on the planet. So if you can have oxygen, you have the ability to do all of the things that you need for metabolism. Now, in anoxic environments, ones where oxygen is not available, this is going to require the presence of other types of mineral electron acceptors. And so in the end, a lot of these are going to be in high demand for organisms. Now, we talk about the necessary or the need for carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but we also need other nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur to build up our proteins and our DNA. Those are quite important. And so things like magnesium, which we learned helps stabilize the structure of your ATP, all of these things are incredibly important to being able to grow. And honestly, in most environments, the main limiting nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. As long as you have those, you are able to grow. And then we can't forget the ones that we have already discussed, like temperature, salinity, and pH. Another really fascinating aspect of microbial ecology and ecology in general is this idea of symbiosis. When it's more than one of them, we call it a symbiosis. Now, this is where organisms evolve to either help each other or to take advantage of each other, depending on the situation of their interaction. Most symbiotic associations are going to have positive and negative relationships. Whether yours is positive or negative just depends. And you can have endosymbioses where things like our chloroplasts and our mitochondria actually entered our cells and formed a symbiosis with our cells themselves, or we can have a symbiosis of close association. So, bacteria that are living in the soil near a root, or bacteria that live in the gut of an animal, something like that. Now, one form of symbiosis that is very important is mutualism. This is going to involve a partner species that has a need for each other. So they both need each other to survive or to be able to handle their particular environment. They benefit from each other, sometimes to the extent that without each other, they cannot survive. This usually involves two partners at the very least. It can involve more. Both of those partners may be microbial. One may be microbial and the other could be a plant or an animal. It just depends on the particular symbiosis that we are talking about. Usually, in the case of a microbial and host partnership, if you remove the microbial partner, the overall host is going to either really have a hard time growing or it's going to die. Now, when you have a microbe that is in a close mutualistic relationship with a plant or an animal host, you're going to see extensive degeneration of their genome or reduction of their genome that we've talked about in the past, where the organism no longer needs to maintain such a large genome because they're getting some of their needs fulfilled via the genome of their host. So their host can do certain activities that they may have been able to in the past, but then chose to give up because it's constantly being supplied to them anyway by their host. A very fascinating example of mutualism is the lichen. You can see some on this branch here. They are a symbiosis between a fungus and either an algae or a cyanobacterium, or it can be a symbiosis between a fungus, an algae, and a cyanobacterium. So these are fascinating little organisms. Their photosynthetic components actually can make food to feed the fungal components, or when these photosynthetic components die off, the algae components, they can feed the fungus itself because the fungus is a decomposer. The fungus actually can produce protecting chemicals like melanin that can protect the cyanobacteria from sunlight. That's supposed to say protect, not produce, excuse me. And then they can also produce, this is the coolest part of a lichen in my opinion, they can produce extracellular enzymes that can degrade minerals. So you will often see lichen on bare rock. So you'll see it on old structures made of rock, things like that. And these enzymes will actually start to degrade the rock so that the organisms can use the minerals stored within. What this ends up doing is slowly taking rock and converting it to soil. So these are highly important organisms for something called primary succession events. When you have something like a big glacier suddenly recede, it leaves a big scar where it's torn into the earth and all it's left behind is bare rock. Or when you have a volcano that erupts, and now in the middle of the ocean, you just have this gigantic mass of rock. How do we get life to form on something that is just rock? Plants need soil in order to grow. Well, in come these lichens. They will establish themselves on these rock, and they will be able to break it down, turn it into soil, and as that soil continues to be produced, organisms will start to move in that can live in this rocky soil first and then into richer and richer soil as it gets converted. Now, there's many different types of symbioses. Mutualism is just one example. There is also synergism. This is an optional cooperation, whereas mutualism tends to be a little bit more necessary to the organism we're finding. But with synergism, this is where both species are going to benefit, but they can grow independently of each other. There is commensalism. This is where one partner benefits and the other is unaffected. The main example that I like to give with this one is not a micro example, but if you've ever seen a grazing animal, something like cattle or an elephant or something like that, as they go around and do their grazing activities, they are highly destructive to the environment. They are ripping up soil, they are taking down trees, and all of that movement of the soil brings up the insects that live in the soil. And so you'll often find a bunch of birds that kind of tag along and follow behind these grazing animals. The grazing animals are going to just keep doing whatever they're doing because that's just what they do. They eat. But these birds are getting a particular benefit from the behavior of these grazers in that all these insects that were once inaccessible to them now become accessible through work that wasn't their own. So they are able to, excuse me, they are able to benefit from the other being unaffected. Now, what we're starting to see is that in the microbial world, a lot of these commensalism relationships are not actually commensal. The more we learn about them, the more we realize that they're probably synergistic. We just don't quite understand the details and the full scope of that relationship yet. Then there is amensalism. This is where one partner is harmed without an intimate association. So it's not necessarily like a parasite that lives in your gut and hurts you. It's more like I heard someone give an example where you can be harmed financially by a family member living with you and mooching off of you. That's in your home, that's like a parasite. But you can also be harmed financially by someone running by you and stealing your purse or your wallet, or victim of identity fraud or something like that. These aren't people that have an intimate association with you, but you are still being harmed by them. An example of amensalism is the actinomycete bacteria. They will produce these antimicrobial peptides, and these are highly antibiotic to other organisms, and they'll end up killing all the bacteria around them. So it's not necessarily a close, intimate association. The actinomycetes just produce this, but it ends up harming all the bacteria around them. And then parasitism is where one benefits while actively harming the other, usually in a parasite host relationship where it's living within or on the other organism. Now, animals have digestive microbiomes. This is a very special form of symbiosis. Now, we do have microbiomes on the surface of our bodies as well, but the one within our body and our digestive system is particularly important. They have many beneficial effects. They help us digest food, they protect us from harmful pathogens, and so they are so essential that an animal is that they are so essential to each other that the animal is considered a holobiont with the microbiome. Now, how essential is the microbiome? We have been able to create aseptic mice, mice that are born in such a way that they never are colonized by bacteria from their mother. And every time they interact with any type of food or water or anything like that, it's been completely sterilized. So these mice never get a microbiome at all. And we find that they die very young and they're very sickly. So our microbiome is essential to us living a thriving life. Now, our most interesting microbiome probably exists in our colon. So, if you're unfamiliar with human anatomy, um, internally you have your small intestines here, and then the colon tends to exist on the edges of your digestive tract. We have the um, transverse, the sigmoid colon, we have all these things. So, in the large intestine and the colon here down at the end. So this is kind of similar to the action of ruminants, but theirs is a much more extensive microbiome that breaks down cellulose, and they have a dedicated area for this particular type of digestion, but it's very similar to our colon. Um, so humans will conduct a lot of their microbial fermentation there. So this is an anoxic environment. There's not a lot of oxygen way down at the end of your digestive tract in your colon here at the end of your large intestine. So usually, this is going to be plant material that has made it through the small intestine without being digested, and the bacteria are able to break it down. So, species like the Bacteroides or Prevotella, they're going to eat the mucin polysaccharides. So, these are mucus and sugars together. Our body produces a lot of mucus, so it's kind of like a food that we tend to give the bacteria. And then pectin, which is found in food, it helps kind of stiffen up the fruit. I'm sorry, I said fruit. Pectin is part of fruit, and it helps kind of make it stiffer, a fruit in general. So you don't necessarily need to add this whenever you're canning. You can just mix up and mash up the fruit, and they come with their own pectin that'll make them more sticky over time. And then there's arabinogalactans. These are basically found in all types of plants that we eat, and they're broken down by the microbes in our gut. And when they do break down these types of molecules, they will end up producing a lot of gas as byproducts of fermentation. So the anaerobes can release things like acetate, which is a signaling molecule. They can release short chain fatty acids, and they end up giving us about 15% of all the energy that we take in from the calories that we eat. Otherwise, this would be 15% of that energy in our food that would be completely unavailable to us. So we consider them to be commensal members of the gut microbiome, and they will usually outcompete any kind of pathogen. So their healthy colonization of our gut is going to prevent us from getting sick from harmful pathogens. And a good way to keep them healthy and fed and keep their populations very stable is to feed them what they want, which is a lot of plants. Um, the human gut microbiome is something that is huge in research right now, and we're finding more and more about it all the time. We will give them things and they will give us things in return. E. coli, for example, as it digests, will often produce GABA. And GABA is a neurotransmitter in humans that helps facilitate our transition into our parasympathetic state, that helps us enter that rest and digest phase so we can digest our food better. So it's kind of interesting how they help us out. There's new links tying the um, the makeup of our microbiome to depression and anxiety and potentially even schizophrenia. So there's a very interesting brain gut connection that's starting to emerge in science. Um, we also know that they send a lot of signals to our Peyer's patches, which is a whole subset of our immune system that only exists in our gastrointestinal tract. And they kind of help us sense our environment because we are eating the food. The bacteria help us break it down and then send these antigens to our immune system to recognize, so we know what is food and what is not necessarily food, but a bad pathogen that we need to take care of. So, moving on, we're going to get away from symbiosis now and discuss aquatic communities of microbes. So, oceans cover more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface, and then the other third is heavily covered in fresh water. So, both of these ecosystems are going to have high amounts of bacteria and algae, and we've discussed this in the past, but they provide more than 50% of the photosynthetic organisms on the planet, meaning, let me be a little more clear with that. They are responsible for more than 50% of the production of Earth's oxygen. So if you want to keep breathing, which is kind of important, we need to consider these ecosystems and the effect that we have on them. So here is just an interesting example of two different cyanobacteria, which are the ones primarily driving the production of oxygen through photosynthesis on the planet. We have Prochlorococcus in this top heat map here. And this is a heat map of abundance. So where you have very red, there's tons of these cyanobacteria. And as you get further down to blue, there's fewer of them. So we can see that Prochlorococcus, which is the smallest cyanobacteria out there, tends to favor the equator. And so it prefers warmer temperatures. So there's these entire areas of the ocean that it doesn't really colonize. Well, enter Synechococcus. Sorry, some of these words are really weird, but these ones can survive in significantly colder temperatures. So they are able to colonize in the oceans further down, and they have a little bit more of a consistent distribution across the ocean rather than the majority concentrated around one latitude. In our freshwater microbial communities, one of the main things that we are worried about here is eutrophism. So in large undisturbed lakes, they're usually what we called oligotrophic. So they have very, very few nutrients and very few microbes. They're kind of like starvation areas where we don't have a lot to support life. Um, any type of phototrophs, so ones that need oxygen and light to survive, they're going to be in a region called the epilimnion, which is basically the top layer of a freshwater body that has more warmth and more light availability. Now, the main issue here is that our freshwater communities are highly affected by things like runoff and pollution and any type of dumping into that body of fresh water. So if you have an instance where something like nitrogen from fertilizer runoff or a septic system leaking into a freshwater microbial community, you're going to have an algal bloom. That's what eutrophism is. This is going to create a situation where now we have flooded this area that's normally very minimal with its nutrients. We've now flooded it with tons of nutrients, tons of nitrogen, tons of phosphorus. And now all of these oxygenic phototrophs are going to bloom. They're going to enter a huge growth phase. And they're going to end up consuming all of the oxygen in the body of water and end up causing the vertebrates to die off as a result. So common causes of this are phosphates. This is a agricultural issue. Again, phosphorus is a common limiting nutrient. Nitrogen is one of the main ones from things like sewage and agricultural runoff. And then we'll also have organic pollutants from sewage. So usually not something we want to have happen because these are rich areas of ecological diversity and we want to maintain that. Now moving away from aquatic, let's discuss briefly soil and plant microbial communities. So in the ocean, the base of producers is basically microbial. We don't have a lot of producers that are not microbes. However, on land, the majority of primary producers are plants. They are macroscopic organisms. And those plants live in soil. Now, soil is not just dirt. Dirt is just the mineral component of soil, but soil also includes all the life that is necessary for this community to thrive, such as decomposers, microbes, all that fun stuff. So it's a mixture of those decaying organic material, the mineral matter, and all the microbes that feed on this. So it's probably the most complex microbial ecosystem. Digging into some good soil, you're going to see a wide range of different species, all living in a very small area. And so, soil based agriculture is the major source of food for all of us. So, it's very important that we maintain this healthy microbe community. Otherwise, we're going to see issues where our plants aren't able to thrive and then we can't eat. So let's talk about one particular ecosystem microenvironment effectively, and that is the microenvironment around roots for plants. So this is divided into two different categories, the rhizoplane and the rhizosphere. So the rhizoplane is the actual surface of the root itself. And then the rhizosphere is about a 5 millimeter area around the rhizoplane. 5 millimeters is about half a centimeter. And this is going to be an area of high microbial activity because the plants are releasing chemical signals, the microbes are releasing chemical signals, and they are all interacting with each other. And particular microbes are adapted to this specific environment. And unfortunately, um, one of those types of organisms that's adapted could be pathogenic, or many of those types of organisms. So the organisms that live here can end up infiltrating the organism through the root and either form a symbiotic relationship or attack the plant as a pathogen. And there's many different plant pathogens out there. Most often they are fungi, but there's also viruses and bacteria that can affect plants as well. So we have here, this is actually this form of a tulip with this really fascinating multicolored pattern. It's actually the result of a virus. So there's some that are truly harmful for the organism, like blight fungus or gall tumors, but there's also some that just affect their physical appearance, which in the end ended up being a good thing for this tulip because it was prized by humans and we ensured its survival and propagation. So that is it for microbial phys, or I'm sorry, microbial ecology. We're not going to dive too deeply into this because we're going to get into the medical side of it now. I know that's where a lot of the students who take micro, they're going to go into the medical field in some way or another. So we're going to spend a bit more time there than just with microbial ecology. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you all later.